Yeah, sounds good. Yeah.
Like Kenny. Yeah.
They recreated our. And I checked, it's working online. Oh, yeah. Keep our fingers crossed.
Exactly. If I could have everyone's attention, please. If I could have everyone's attention, please. It is a beautiful Friday afternoon outside, and the fact so many of us are indoors is definitely a testament to our two great speakers here today. Dick Bories is an architect, and James Shearron is a designer. James grew up in Lake Forest, and they have been involved in many memorable projects, including Grey Gardens in East Hampton, places in Montecito, California, Eaton Square in London, and many beautiful homes right here in Lake Forest. And their firm has been named by Architectural Digest to the AD 100, which is people who are the top architects and designers in the country. So this is an incredible honor. And it's hard to think of a better pair to talk about David Adler, a premier architect here in Lake Forest and Lake Bluff. They will talk about, I believe, 5 houses that Adler was involved with in the area. And for those of you who want to know more after they talk, ironically enough, tonight PBS is starting a special documentary on David Adler. They're going to have 4 episodes on Adler, and 3 of them involve houses in Lake Forest and Lake Bluff. So Dick and James, take it away.
I'm James Shearron.
I'm Dick Bories.
I'll probably be doing all the blabbing. And, Dick might sit down. He has a bad back.
He is Ed McMahon over here.
Okay.
So
So let's
nice
see.
meeting you.
And what today, one of the things I want to express most today is that we're going to sort of take you on a journey of understanding the ideal period in David Adler's work, right around the 1930s, and try to teach you a bit about what happened in that moment, where he got to in his career, and what he was doing that made him so special. Like, why are we here? Why are we here today? Why David Adler? Why does everybody talk about David Adler? Why our guy? Of all the architects, which are so many around the country, many architects, as you know, even in Lake Forest and all the great watering holes, doing beautiful houses in the early part of the 20th century. But it all starts, excuse me, with this book. I mean, aside from his work, the reason maybe we're all here and I'm here, thanks to the Art Institute of Chicago and Adler's friend Hammond and all the other great patrons who wanted to make sure that he wasn't forgotten. And in the 1970s, the Art Institute put together this extraordinary book, which is, I think, for many of us, may have seen it in our parents' house when we were kids. That's what happened to me growing up here. This book was saying around. I thought, who is this guy? Some people I may have known their parents' houses, but the book was an amazing entree to understanding his work. And the aspect of what we want to say mostly about David is that he was an eclectic architect, meaning that he's putting together things of many different styles, and he was the master of that. I mean, everybody is eclectic in some way, whether your coat matches your pants or whatever you're doing, he was the master of that. And that brilliance of being able to know how to to move forward. Okay, sorry, Dick's gonna help me. So he was the master, and here is David Adler looking smashing. Actually, on the other side of this photograph that we cut off was a picture of Marshallfield III. They were somewhere together in Philadelphia, actually. Before I go forward, I actually want to remember to thank a friend of ours. There's a good friend of ours named Scott Howell, and he will someday be back here soon in the next year or two. He is putting together the very last word on Frances Elkins, who many of you may know is David's sister. He is putting together a book for Rizzoli, an extraordinary volume, and he was very generous, sharing many of his beautiful pictures with us. And I want to give a shout out to Scott and thank him for sharing his work with us. So this is David in his office, and not in his office, in Philadelphia. This picture of his office, and you can see out the window, that's the Art Institute of Chicago. His office was at the, what's it called? The Orchestra Hall. His office was at Orchestra Hall. And the other thing I wanted to say about him is he's also a modernist. That was that first word coming up, that he was an eclectic modernist. So if he started out his career in an early way, in a much more academic way, building houses like the Ely House and other houses we may know in town, the teens and the 20s, as he started reaching his peak, I think like any of us do, as we're aging and getting smarter and better at what we do, his house is really hitting his stride. And it's that moment that we really want to talk about, where he's bringing an awareness of all modern things that were happening in the world in the 30s, and also really reaching his own confidence to be as eclectic as he wanted to be and blend it in with modernism. The first house we're going to show you is the house of Evelyn Marshallfield III. This is Marshallfield III's first wife, and that would be our own Marshallfield V's grandfather, and this would be his great grandmother, excuse me. Okay, and this is in Syosset, New York, built in 1931. Here's a picture of Mrs. Field and her daughter Barbara, and on the right is a painting of Barbara, who was quite a special debutante at the time by, can you tell me the name? Bouton de Mauvais, who was one of the great society painters at the time. As you can see how stylishly modern the painting is of Barbara is very indicative of what everybody was passionate about at that time. And Mrs. Field was particularly a fashionable woman. Here's a picture of Mrs. Field, Mrs. Evelyn Marshallfield on the right, Shirley Temple in the middle, Frances Elkins on the left, and David Adler on the far left. We thought this was a particularly amusing picture, only because some of the folklore is that possibly Frances Elkins, David's sister, and Mrs. Field weren't particularly fond of children. But this is, and I think the way, and you'll see when you see Mrs. Field's house, all of you are interested, the way in which Mrs. Field is dressed is extraordinary, from her hat to the way her fur coat is cut, exquisite tailoring, and clearly someone who had an eye and understanding for style. She had built actually more than one house with David Abbott. I mean, her first house with Mr. Field was a very large townhouse in New York City, one of the largest townhouses ever built in New York. They lived there for a short few years before they were divorced, across from the Frick. And then she right away, immediately after the divorce, a year or two after, decided to build her own house with David. And that's this house. This house is in Syosset, New York. This house is kind of a who's who of the best of Virginia houses. If you know your Virginia houses at all, if you know Stratford Hall, those big giant chimneys on the top, the sort of four square chimneys, and the shape of it is very reminiscent of Stratford Hall. And this is an example of David Adler's eclecticism. So you've got a house, Stratford Hall. You've got a front porch that's very reminiscent of everything going on in Charleston. You have nothing to do with Stratford Hall. On the far left, if you can see that porch, that's straight out of Gunston Hall, exactly out of Gunston Hall in Virginia. And on the back, you're going to see Monticello. An extraordinary house. This house is somewhat intact and still there, but it's been altered. It's lost the top floor. Yeah. There, this is one of his most fine houses. And this was built just for Mrs. Field and her three children, just at the beginning of their divorce. And I think if any of you are familiar with the look of Charleston, that white iron stairway coming up to what is more of a federal doorway is a complete eclecticism. He's taking, again, the bones of Stratford Hall, which is a very early house, and blending it with a much more fashionable aesthetic, delicate, lighter for a summer house. This house is a Palladian house, meaning it has extending wings. And there's Stratford Hall. Maybe if I kind of go back and forth, you can see what he was thinking. So he however it went about, we don't, as many letters as we've read and research we've done, how Mrs. Field and he came about deciding this is my inspiration. I love Stratford Hall, or I love Virginia houses. I love Monticello, and I love Gunston Hall, also in Virginia. Or did she say that? They say, let's do a Virginia house. And then did they travel around, look at them all together? We don't know everything, but it's possible something like that happened. Or he was such a visionary. Did he have this already in his mind? Here's some of my favorite houses. I'm looking at your site. I'm looking at the topography. I think I could make this work. And that brilliance is David Adler. This is the back of it. So as you can see now, the land is much higher in the back. So in the front, it was dropped down. At the back, it's up. And that center portico is straight from the back of Monticello. And there's a close-up of the portico. There's Monticello. I mean, what you can't see in my picture, the previous one with the trees, is those little parapet walls that Monticello has on top. Those are the square bits coming off the top of the pediment. He copied that right down to that detail. Again, that's the eclecticism. This is the inside of the house, and this is the first slide that I want to really ask you to think about what it means. The idea of modernism. He's taking this perfectly pitch perfect interior, someone who really understood moldings and the proportions and details and what was right, but the floor is made of ebony and stainless steel. And this is what one would call a Chinese puzzle pattern. Why? What was in his head that said, I'll do this house, even the house is traditional and all these bits and pieces from various traditional houses, but I want to do something else. I don't want to make it stuffy. I want something new. I'm excited about new ideas. And the client said yes. I think I'd like to ask all of you to imagine, what would you say to your architect if you were going to build a new Georgian house, a Greek revival, or a colonial house? And if these architects said, how about an ebony and steel Chinese puzzle pattern floor? And you said, would that look okay? And I think that's one of the most important parts about this. I know I talked to Shelley earlier, who's a designer, about if you can think of this period, that's how he was thinking. In his head, he was so excited, he must have been, to express these ideas that nobody else had done. All kinds of architects are always touching on something, a little bit of deco or something, but he took it to a place that I think he has no equal. That's why the whole world and the country keeps talking about him. Starting from the Blue Book, all the many books. The Art Institute did a book. I wrote a chapter. Actually, I wrote a chapter on this house in the Art Institute's book about 20 years ago. Oh God, we have all these notes. Sorry. This house was built in 1931. First wife of Marshallfield, what I told you, divorced in 1930. So Mrs. Field was 48 years old when she built this house. That's the other thing I'd like you to think about is when imagine these in your own lives or what you've heard of, she's a woman on her own, building this entire estate. And there are a number of buildings here. The house is large. There are outbuildings. There's a winter cottage. There's a guest cottage. There's a very large garage. Think of what that means. And it doesn't mean that she just said, hand it to you. There's that much money. Let me know I'll move in when I get there. It's a lot of responsibility and all on her own. And there are a number of cases through Adler's career, and it's not just the houses we're talking about, where he built mostly just for women. And I'm not sure what that is. Could it be how they were drawn to him? Was he drawn to them, or just an odd happenstance of the time and men dying earlier? But there's a number of cases like that.
Also this house is still in the middle of a huge, vast tract of forest in the middle of Long Island, which is really rare.
It's beautiful.
Still privately owned.
This is the other side of that hall. So you can really see this crazy puzzle pattern. Now the rest of the hall is white. White was one of his favorite interior colors. There are very few interiors that aren't white. There are bits and pops of color and texture, but coming out of the 19th century, a child born at the end of the Victorian era, living in his parents' house, or maybe even no other houses here that would have still been standing at the time, places he would have known as a young man. This excitement of white, houses that were closed up, more sealed, air conditioning, some having air conditioning, forced air being better, opened up the opportunity for houses to be this crisp and white. And that was the excitement. So this is, I mean, all I can say is if it doesn't speak for itself to you, that there's the shockingness of what this has done. And this floor becomes a signature floor. It also appears in a house in Lake Forest that I'll show you later.
We tried that.
Here's the detail, but I think sometimes it's fun just to really understand what's that pattern about. And to lay this out, there is one other place I've seen this floor in a 20th century way, and it is in Stockholm, I think, in the courthouse. Is an extraordinary place in Stockholm. And behind where I think where the mayor or the governor sits, this vast tall wall with this exact same pattern on. It's possible he saw it there. He traveled widely in Europe. He had vast clipping files, collecting, categorizing everything he ever saw, like, you know, a pattern of everything, a detail there. He was very, very fluent that way. And often when you see these things, you wonder where, because they all have some previous period origin.
And we've tried to draw this pattern. There's a repeat in there. It's really, really hard to find.
Not easy.
Even now.
In the same house, now a completely modern powder room. I should mention at this time that David and his sister Frances Elkins were connected to a group who you may or not know. It was named Jean-Michel Frank, who was centered in Paris. And Jean-Michel Frank in Paris was the height of the most modern approach to our interiors you could imagine, with many great clients, and he was completely reinventing the wheel, unlike anyone had ever seen before. You know, the first person who was about to say, you know, live in a simple plaster room with just one little wicker chair. It was the idea of minimalism. And Frank, David Adler and his sister Frances became friends of Jean-Michel Frank in Paris and his circle, which would be Schiaparelli, Giacometti, and the surrealist Salvador Dali. So they kept coming from Milwaukee and finding themselves connected to that group in Paris. You know, why? You know, what was it about that brother and sister and their creative sense of mind that they felt so drawn to that group? So this powder room in Evelyn Field's house very much expresses this. The little chest, the little vanity looks like it's all in silver leaf. The walls are in the plainest kind of plaster moldings. And if you can see on the wall, that's a plaster hand coming forward, holding a gold bowl. And that's the sconce. And that's purchased directly from Paris, from the Frank shop, created by Giacometti. This is the living room in Mrs. Field's house. This is to tell you a bit more of when he's completely period. The living room is federal. So the house is a combination of Stratford Hall, a house from Charleston, and their living room is very much an American federal house, American federal detailing, but with parquet Versailles floors, which was popular at the time. And you'll see if any of your friends have been Adler houses here, that he bought acres and acres and acres of parquet Versailles from France, where many of them had trouble with their finances and were selling their floors, and it was an American favorite. It was kind of a sign of luxury to have parquet Versailles, no matter what the architecture was. French parquet Versailles floors going with American federal moldings, but it's about luxury and style, and do you know how to put it together? You can see here his sister creating this extraordinary summer house for Mrs. Field. The floors are all bare. This is really meant to be a summer house. All the windows are open, the floors are bare, all the cool chintz, walls are pure white. A subtle detail here that we find interesting as architects, and I think to ask yourselves as clients or friends of yours who are in the design business, I keep thinking, ask yourself, well, what would I allow? What would I accept from my architect or decorator? Right in the middle of the mantel is a niche. How many of you would say, well, wouldn't there be a painting there or a mirror? Or would I say that if my architect said, I've got this great idea, it's going to be a niche, trust me. It's a trust me moment, right? It's a classic phrase from any architect or decorator. Whether or not Mrs. Field owned the bust, whether or not he said, I'd like to put a niche there, I really think the room needs it, and she went and found a bust. Those are those moments, they don't seem like a big deal, but the more you know about his work and look into it, it's that subtlety and the whimsy and the curiosity and the confidence that make his houses special. This is a typical arranger, really, but the best of typical of what his sister did. This is where here their forces are joined together in this perfect elevation. Her love of pairs of Coromandel screens, The lamps are also by Giacometti, the pairs of chairs, the parquet Versailles floor, the soft color palette. In scale and proportion, every object in this photograph, from the figurines on the mantle, is in perfect balance. And that was a signature thing too, the buckets for logs. Now, this is really where they're coming together. This is the dining room in the house. And if you can see in the pictures, these are plaster palms on the walls. The plaster palms really started in the 18th century, places like Spencer House. I don't know if you've ever visited that in London. And Adler, attaching himself to this design and produced it in more than one house. So here's a dining room in your period house, whether you love Virginia architecture, colonial architecture, and your architect says, we're going to do the whole dining room plaster palms. I mean, we always say yes now because these are rather famous. But in 1930, how many other dining rooms had you seen like that? Had you even been to Europe? Maybe you hadn't, or maybe you'd been to just a small, you'd only gone to London. Maybe Spencer House wasn't open to the public in 1930. So he convinces you to have no cornice on the ceiling. The plaster palms are actually growing out of a plaster dado all the way around the room. Trust me, this will be exciting in your summer house. That's the detail. Now, across the bottom, can you see that crisscross? That's the chair rail. So the palms are growing out of the chair rail up onto the ceiling, which is curved. There's no cornice. It's creating a kind of a garden room. That's a vision of a piece of architecture, sculptural. Like you're at the dining table and you're inside this sculptural moment. Something other than, should it have wallpaper? We paint it red, nothing. This room, by the way, is yellow and white. All those chairs are covered in a bright sort of Chinese yellow or lemon yellow. The room is pure white. The mantle behind you, as you can see, is shimmering, which is brand new in this photograph. That's a stainless steel slip and a glass Steuben Belection molding. Steuben glass that we all know about at the time when the Houghtons became part of it, become big into architectural glass. They were doing all kinds of things, not just for Adler, but taking their glass factories and making architectural glass, which was part of the excitement of the Art Deco period. Am I going slow? Sorry. All right. Here's a close-up of the same mantle. And here's the brilliance of, here's this glass collection mantle, an extraordinary stainless steel slip that is incise decoration, and this over-the-top kind of a chinoiserie, Chippendale, silvered, over mantle mirror. Here's the mirror. Here's the drawing that was in Elkin's own archive. That's his sister's archive. Now, did he send her the blank of the dining room? And because she bought the mirror, does it fit? There's a lot of questions that go on, but where did Elkins leave off and where did Adler start? I think the question will go on forever, but I think most of us should ask ourselves, about blood. Our brothers and sisters have the same taste, sisters and sisters, and if you were to create a business, what would be more have more synergy? And there are no other people that I know of in the history of architecture and decoration where brother and sister were working like that. There are two brothers, the Keck and Kecks, who did house here. There were architects. There are sometimes mother daughter, but the idea of brother and sister, whatever they must have shared so much of, oh, I like that. That's great. Let's do that. Somehow these interiors and architecture just flowed out of the two of them. They met in a way that never had an equal. This is the screen porch on that house. Now, we're of the opinion that Adler's screen porches mixed with his sister's decoration were some of the most beautiful screen porches ever made. The screen porch at the Christie Reed's house here was equally as, if not more, amazing. I mean, there was no air conditioning. And if you had that much taste, why would you make your screen porch something plain? So they took it to the nth degree. All her screen porches have real upholstery for the sofas. She starts that way. That's kind of her signature. Then it's surrounded by wicker chairs, lamps, rugs. They're meant to be lived in. I mean, and they're really, they hit the mark. There's nothing like them. This is the porch at the end of the house that is indicative. I mean, is a copy of Gunston Hall in Virginia. If you've ever been there, it's the front. When you walk up to Gunston Hall, it's that front porch. That is the field side porch, the screen porch. The second floor of Mrs. Field's dressing quarter. I'm not sure how easy all these images are to see from your vantage point, but his love of mirror. He really understood what to do with mirror. And there are many people in the 20s and 30s using mirror, but he did it in a way unlike anybody else. He did it in an architectural way. If there were bits and pieces of mirror, there were keystones, there were studs that held the mirror together. He saw it as architecture. He wanted to bring it into the millwork and the moldings to make it more than just sheets of mirror and nothing more. It was something much more than that. This is Mrs. Field's bathroom, a chintz bathroom. All these rooms are tucked up inside those chimneys, those great big Stratford Hall chimneys. The house on the second floor is a sort of a meandering bits where they go in and out of the chimney blocks. And so this bathroom actually coming through it is through one of those chimney blocks. Here, there's a fireplace below a window. I mean, the brilliance of figuring out all the details, being architects, I can tell you that the amount of detailing that has to go into getting everything right. The tiny little mantle around the fireplace is mirrored, fitting perfectly with the window, and somehow marrying with the palmet or the valance over the window, all of it coming together in a pitch perfect way. A bedroom on that second floor. If any of you know Italy or Rome, the floor is Italian. So on the second floor of the summer house in a guest bedroom is the floor that you'd see almost everywhere in Italy, in every corridor, everywhere, this bold graphic circular patterns, how it's completely Italian. But the one thing he did here, aside from the surprise of that, what made him think this would make this room exciting? He also uses the same thing in the Wheeler house. If all of you know that house on Mayflower. The floor is made of a material called zenither. And just like, they're inventing new modern materials all the time, like, different kinds of kitchen floors, cognoleum or linoleum, whatever. Somebody invented a material called zenither that was made of many different things. And he fell in love with it. I mean, he truly fell in love with it. He used this product Zenitherm in every single house, in every single way you possibly imagine, over and over and over and over again. And it met every property he was looking for.
And it's full of asbestos.
It's full of asbestos, and eventually, depending on how you, and depending on how you took care of it, there aren't many left because they started to crumble.
It's meant to look like stone. It does look like stone.
Yeah, it came in a series of earthy colors. He did it in thousands of patterns, chopping up, putting together. Today we see people doing things with marble and stone in easy ways because of water jetting. He was sort of doing the same thing there. He fell in love with a product that he thought could give him anything he wanted, and it had a dignity, and it wasn't a plastic, it looked like stone. So in this bedroom is a stone floor from Rome. Here's the pattern. And what's brilliant about it even more so, and this is eclecticism and creativity. Can you see the background of planks? So he's putting it together if it's planks, which makes sense because it's an old Virginia house, but it's also a bold pattern. It's like as if it was a black wooden plank floor incised with white, curvaceous, Roman styled Baroque decoration. It's an amazing feat and unique to him. This is another one of his signature expressions, and he expresses it more than once in different houses. This is the winter cottage of that house. Maybe you've heard in your own reading and understood that many of the houses, some of the ones in Lake Forest and around the country, a lot of large houses often have what was either called a winter cottage, or it may have been the first building that was built before the main house. If the house took a couple of years to build, you're starting right away, the little house gets done first, at least you have a place to go and stay and visit the house and so forth. This is the winter cottage at the Field Estate. The charm of this is here he's putting together a kind of a mural, as if it was an old colonial mural in a naive style of the house. There's a false little beam over the door for no reason, to make it look old. The floor that looks like an old, I guess it would be a early 19th century hooked rug, that's all a zenither. That's not paint, it's not stone. There's a tiny little pieces of this combination of asbestos, and straw and all kinds of other crazy things to make this kind of hard, blocky, dry material that you would fit together in these beautiful patterns. And he would take, rugs he liked or anything else, and you walk in on this was a hard feeling stone floor.
It's a hook.
In the pattern of like a hooked rug. Down to the very last detail. everything's a vision and creative. So in a second floor bedroom in the guest cottage, a rather plain bedroom, but you can see he's carrying the colonial theme, or his sister is, because of their constant synergy. There's a little chest on the floor that looks typical of early American chest, but tucked into this little bay, this little dormer, is a miniature dressing table. That's just a few pieces of lumber, nail heads, two little Art Deco side lights. In that one moment, everything coming here in this moment is essentially everything Adler and Elkins are about in this little desk. It's modern, it's traditional with the mirror, it's tucked into something in a brilliant way that you'd never expect. He paid all the attention to it, making sure that the lights were there. I mean, knowing what that means to say, I think I want to have two recessed lights here. It's an amazing moment for whether that was a guest bedroom for that guest to have someplace to sit. Another room in the house. This is a famous wall covering that actually, I haven't even told, there's lots of stories that come from Bories and Shearron. This is a wall covering that we actually helped bring back to life. About 15, 20 years ago, I was working in House and Garden. We were doing our 100th annual issue, our first 100th issue. And there's a famous room at a Tobin Clark house that has the same wallpaper by David Adler, but also by Siri Malm. And it had never, ever been seen in color. It had been written about by the famous decorator Billy Baldwin in his book describing Mrs. Tobin Clark's house. And he had the beautiful description of the house and told that it was all green and white. And so when Dominic Browning, the editor-in-chief at the time, asked me to do, what would you do special, James, for the 100-year anniversary? I have an idea. Why don't we rebuild Mrs. Tobin Clark's famous bedroom, the whole thing, just as Adler had done it, and we'll build it in a studio, and we'll make the wallpaper, and we'll show the world what it looked like in green, because no one had ever seen it, because it was black and white photography. So we made the wallpaper, and it went into production, and it's still made today by Studio Printworks and popular paper and a great design. The next house, which is, so we're home, which is really the best house. I don't know how it happened, which is part of the conversation. Why? I can see Peter on the screen here. I know. So Mr. Reed, who died very soon in let me get to my pages because I'm going to get this wrong, and I know that the grandkids are listening. In the tennis house was built first, what we're not showing today, for Helen Shedd Reed, and that's the Shedd Aquarium, and then Helen's sister would be Mrs. Schweppe. So an extraordinary Chicago family with obviously a passion for taste. I mean, the Schweppe house is an extraordinary house, and Francis Elkins did that later too, which has come to light. So they're two. So what would her sister like to do? And also the library, our extraordinary library. So these two sisters coming together, honoring the deceased Mr. Reed, and asking Mr. Hamill, another extraordinary man, what should we do with our library? So I mean, all the energy behind that, of people with extraordinary style and taste, a passion for beautiful things.
And she's sitting here in the tennis house.
And that's somewhat, I may be wrong, and if the Reeds are listening, they might tell me I'm wrong, but she's in her own tennis house, and it rather looked like an old picture of Mrs. Keith, and I couldn't find a young picture of her. Oh, you're Stephen. Oh, hi.
Hi.
Hello. Oh, thank you. I was worried about that. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you. I couldn't find a lovely young picture of your grandmother that would compliment, and I thought, well, I'll just take a chance. Thank you.
Thank you.
So by the time husband was dead and they got to building the house, she was 47 years. There's a great article. The first time I saw, I think, the inside of this house, just by luck, I'd gone to an estate sale on Deer Path where Ogden West used to live. You may have known them. And I was there with my mother, and I don't know what I was buying, maybe something for $2. And there was a magazine on a bookshelf. And I opened up the magazine, or whether it was a book, and tucked inside of it were a bunch of magazine pages. And the Wests, who would have been living around the corner from the Reeds in 1935, pulled out the Town and Country article, which covered in 1935 the Reeds' new house. And there were all these extraordinary photographs of the house, had to be done in black and white when it was brand new. And that became part of my own education, is to understand the inside of the house. And you'll see some of these pictures here today. And the first line of that article by the author is, "Don't let us make this a stuffy house." And I think often that must have been, what they were all thinking. How can we get these houses to move, do something new, change up, let's mix it up. They weren't afraid. With all those connections to everybody in Paris, their minds are in a different place. The Christie Coates Reed House is a Pennsylvania house. So Pennsylvania house in the Midwest, made of Wissahickon schist stone. That's that great silvery gray stone that you see all over Pennsylvania. So it all had to be shipped here. Again, like the house of Mrs. Field in Syosset, New York, with a passion for Virginia, here's a house in the Midwest on the lake with a passion for Pennsylvania. And it's truly a passion for Pennsylvania, from the stone, and you'll see the others. Here's the great front elevation, which looks a bit like a village, and the brilliance of to be able to do this, starting from the center block, moving to the left to the service wing, and to handle that with such perfection, and that it makes sense, as if it was built over time, where things were added on, and the hierarchy from the service wing to the center. Here's the beautiful front of it. Pay attention, please, to the trees in the forecourt. We're of the opinion that this is something very, very special. The austerity of the forecourt is just the house, the gravel driveway. You can see in the center, there's a tiny pool, the trees, and maybe 2, 4, 6 yews. That's it. There's nothing else there. There are no flowers. There's no ground cover. There's nothing else. That kind of modern vision is the same you saw on the inside, you're seeing on the outside. It's a piece. It's someone thinking, what is this? What can I make? And I think the next.
And you can see someone left the trees that were there, close the driveways to the trunk. We're of the opinion that someone say these trees.
It had to be. There had to be a conversation going, whether it was the landscape architect, whether it was Adler, whether it was Mrs. Reed, someone saying this is a big deal to try to save all these oak trees and build a house right next to them. If you'll think about it, have you ever seen a house anywhere, whether in Europe, a small palace, a manor house, anywhere in America, in Virginia, any great house you've ever been to, where the whole forecourt is filled with trees? Nobody would do it. No one would build it today. Nobody would have even done it in the 18th century. They'd chop them all down because they're proud of their house. This to us it's almost like an art piece. Here's the back of the house, an extraordinarily beautiful, dignified house. Really one of his best. The combination we ask, what makes architects and clients, landscape architects and decorators all work together? Sometimes just the magic of the moment. Say, is it the right budget? Is it the right energy? What other jobs do they have? Is it the inspired client? Is the client that only says yes? And there's always one job where it just everything hits at the right moment. And this house, the reason everybody talks about it, it hit on every single cylinder. And it's an extraordinary piece of architecture, decoration, landscape architecture, and architecture.
And they copied the coursing and size and the layout of the stone exactly to what you see.
So here I'm showing this slide, which is not a great picture, but I think this is a comment to make. And us, David, when we were all here as kids, because I know the forecourt is a bit more planted now, I didn't even pay attention to this as a kid but it doesn't make any sense. The entire house just has woods in front of it, inside of a classical formal forecourt. It would be as if we went to, let's say here in the front, and you were going to have an artist do an installation, and they came and put in all steel trees or trees in pots, and wasn't that exciting for a wedding or any place else we've been where people do installations. This is almost like an installation. It's really rare. I wish I knew how it came about. I don't, it doesn't, come up in any of the sort of journals or information, but it's unique and it's special. And again, like starting, don't let us make this a stuffy house. Someone already said, I wanted to be something different. Or he wasn't even afraid. He had enough confidence to say no to work. That's okay. Don't you want to see your house? And there are all these old white oaks or other kinds of trees. This is one of the main inspirations, again, back to Philadelphia. This is this Pennsylvania house with a Wissahickon schist stone. Mount Pleasant, one of the great houses of Philadelphia, and clearly one of the sort of underlying inspirations for Adler's eclectic approach to this architecture. But it's mixed with two houses, two of his favorites. And then there's Cliveden. These two houses together, a mashup, coming together, falling in love with everything they were about, pulling it apart, putting it back together, are exactly what that house is made of.
And
The Reed house.
the dormers are exact.
Yeah, the dormers, the detail, right down to every detail of the dormer, the choice of the bits of trim of marble as opposed to limestone, the stone, the window panes, the size, the shutters. And some of these houses at the time had been drawn by HABS, the
Historical American Building Survey.
Historical American Building Survey, which is an extraordinary thing at the Library of Congress of many, many, many great American houses drawn in great, great detail that were available to people. But still, the vision of these two houses, pulling them apart, putting them back together. This is the entry hall of the Reed House. This is one of the original stereoptics. So I should take a moment. Maybe you've noticed on some of these to see that some of the corners are cut off the pictures. So, and which is, excuse me, a little bit of a story, but it was an exciting thing. How it came about, but as you know, there's stereoptics all over the country. People were doing them of little kids sitting on rocks, World's Fairs, funny cars, circuses, but stereoptics were a thing. And there was a Chicago company, and they didn't necessarily always sell it directly to the architect or the decorator, but sometimes they sold it to the homeowner, like a kind of a travel salesman. Like if the stereoptic man met Mrs. Wheeler, then Mrs. Wheeler would tell Mrs. Reed, I just met the stereoptic man. He's going to do a collection of my house. You should have one done of your house. So almost all the houses in Lake Forest and the Adler houses were either David or his sister said, let's do stereoptics, or the client happened to have met the traveling stereoptic salesman who then produced these extraordinary collections. They could be as many as 60 images, houses, gardens, everything, your whole house that you look through and see it in 3D. And that's what this is.
It's half of it.
Yeah, so this is the famous men's dressing room of that house. And this is, if I can get through this, I know I talk a lot. I hope it won't get through fast enough. This is that whole dichotomy, just like the front garden being modern. Here inside the house, right in the front door, to the left, through that extraordinary period, sort of traditional, very classical hallway, immediate to left, that's felt right for men, is the most austere of the moment, high couture, as if whatever we could say right now, what is right now? What is the thing of the moment that is the hottest? That's this room. They said, you must have this room. I'm going to buy all the furniture from Frank. We're going to install it in this room. We're going to do it just like Frank did, just a white plaster box with all the Frank pieces, which are equally as modern and austere. Here's a detail of one of those plaster hands I spoke about early from Giacometti, an extraordinary surrealist, a hand coming out of the wall, holding a cup in a modernist way. Now, oops, right across the hall, in complete dichotomy, is the ladies' dressing room. So, which makes perfect sense. And that's part of the excitement of it. I mean, you get both. I mean, you get the thrill of the energy of moving through the house from something completely austere to something much more traditional. But even in its traditionalness, it's still modern at the time. It has a black floor that also has bits of steel inlay. The fireplace, as you can see, is uplit on the top, and then it's colored. So there's also the contrast of one room's completely raw, white plaster, natural leather, shagreen, vellum, all earthy, simple, humble materials, and across the opposite way is full-on glamour. All the furniture is silver leafed. The details are all silver leafed. The mirror. It's an extraordinary example again of his brilliance and his sister's brilliance coming together. The room is essentially an early Georgian room or Queen Anne style period room. That's a warmer, richer form of architecture and detailing, and the pieces of furniture in the room reflect that. And instead of leaving the furniture as it was in brown, all the furniture has been silvered, so it all becomes part of a piece. It's a complete art piece. This is the great long hall, which is essentially again looking traditional, but the more if I can tell you behind the scenes what's going on. The fixture hanging in the middle is Murano. It's Italian. It is ultra modern chandelier. It's nothing like these at all, or anyone you'd ever imagine. It was down to the barest minimum. It could have hung in a I don't know what I'm trying to think. What would be a super modern place to hang? Radio City Music Hall would be comfortable there. It's a very, very modern piece. Something to keep this all moving. The way that Francis and David installed artworks, and they seem to have a love of Dutch paintings, that austere, tailored, rigid sort of old Dutch paintings were a favorite. I think they had a kind of elegance to them, less romantic, almost more modern. They often put them on the walls in the frames, glued to the walls, or made in the wall. The frame would be painted white if the wall was white. So it becomes even more part of the architecture with that very Dutch black and white ordered sort of figures. And the next a detail from this hall that's special that you would just think you wouldn't notice. There are X number of these arched doorways in the hall, and I haven't seen any other American architect do this. The door case, which is great classic door case, is incised with black Belgian marble. Brilliant. You know, it's a first, and he did it more than one house. So thinking I'm going to have all these white rooms. What can I do? How can I give them something? How can I wake them up? What can I do different than no one else has ever done?
And there's no panel in the reveal.
And even you might even say again, like if you were the client and the architect was showing you your house you're going to love, your Philadelphia, beautiful, traditional, romantic house, the reveals, that's the part that goes, you know, inside the door or the window. They're completely plain. They're flush. So it's modern and it's not. You know, it's richly detailed with period moldings, but the reveal inside the door is completely flush and flat. And then it has black marble stuck in it to be modern, almost like black lacquer. So that's what I think that's what makes all these so compelling. You know, even if people don't know the details, what is it about Adler that draws you into these extraordinary things he created? The end of the hall with the famous glass stairway, that alone, a glass stairway. There is one other one in England, and whether or not he saw that, it's the craziest house, if I could think of the name of it. Mansfield Manor does have a glass staircase, but nothing like this. It was more of a, you know, crazy English eccentric kind of house where they added on wing after wing after wing after wing, and every time they did something new, they did something crazier. It wasn't meant to be glamorous, I'm not sure, or a certain kind of glamour. That's the only other one I'd seen that, you know, came before this. So this extraordinary vision of a glass staircase at the end of the hall. And the idea of the Moroccan runner, again, I find that the idea, you know, if anyone knows, like who knows how to put together the striped tie with the right plaid shirt, this is it. There's a black and white floor, and then there was a crisscross, organic, handmade black and white crisscross rug, which changes it all. What if it was just plain or solid? Or what if there was no rug? Or what if it's just a flat runner with edges? It's something to mix it all up and keep it moving. The next slide is to show you, I think, one of the, this is this beautiful hall, commissioned by Peter Reed, the grandson, when his grandmother died. His friend Louis Medina did an extraordinary documentation of the entire house, which well deserved as an art piece. I think it's in our library here in a book. I know it's part of the Art Institute archives, and it's an amazing vision of the house as it was before it was sold. This is a beautiful picture by Louis Medina looking from the staircase back down the hall. But at the bottom of the stairs, if you can see to the right, that little tiny white paneling bit behind the flowers, that is the only opening, the only door to get into the most extraordinary library. So again, your architect said, well, it's just going to be a little hole. I mean, you're paying for this amazing library. Wait till you see it. And the only way to get in is just this little hole in the wall. There's something, trust me, that'll be cool. The staircase is the story. That's all that matters. It'll be okay. Well, is this fancy enough? No, it's just a little hole in the wall. And here's the library, which I know many of you have probably seen, a very famous library. It's completely covered in Hermes leather. The library itself, the background, the bones, the walls are as modern as it could be, ultra modern. Then Adler takes and contrasts all the modernity with pickled Georgian pine 18th century detailing. He's creating that same push and pull modern. He takes it as far, I think it's almost, again, like a kind of art piece. Now the books are disappearing on the wall because the bookcases don't have the trim on them. They're blended in. And if I recall right, many of the books were also covered in vellum to disappear. It's a vision. You know, I'm sorry, Laura, the door is the other one. This door, I believe, goes to a closet. So when you come through that oval, you round the circle round, you get through a bit, and then the door on the far right, you enter in that other door to the right of this fireplace.
It's to the right.
Yeah. This, I mean, one could talk just all day just about this room, forgive me. There are so many pieces to it. We were talking earlier about reveals. Those are the pieces that go around the doors and in the windows. The books are in the reveals. So that's like a kind of, almost like a kind of fool the eye, trompe l'oeil, surrealism. As opposed to having all the books obvious as they are next to this sofa, the rest of the books are hidden between the wall and the window. So when you walk through a French door, you're surrounded by books. This complete piece of theater, probably a terrible way to store books. I'm not really sure in terms of that, but an amazing experience of something sensual. The furniture is also here, most all mix of Franc, mixed with antique pieces in a very high style way. Minimal at the same time warm, bringing the warmth of the pickled Georgian details with it. Here's the other end. Now this really shows you. You can see that sort of beigey bits that are running up and around the windows. Those are the pickled pine Georgian detailing against this austere Hermes leather.
And the books are behind the curtain there, I don't know if you can see.
The books are hidden behind all those curtains. The chair at the far end is a Franc chair, which actually I own. When Buzz Norton had the sale for the house, funny story. Some of the pieces finally ended up at the Glore House, the Frank Lloyd Wright House in Mayflower. I think I was about 18 years old. And I went to that sale and I got, God, I have this chair. And I almost bought the sofa for the room, but the famous harpsist that used to be with Chicago Symphony, she bought it. She lives in Highland Park. I think it's been sold since then. And I don't know if it was this chair, the repair, or the other one, but for years it was my mother's little house in Lake Forest. And now it's actually across the street in the attic of the Casati's house. I eventually gave it to my friend, Greg Casati. There's one could go on and on about this room, even the way the carpets are laid out, Adler and Elkins, and I think it's really just hard to know whether it was both. The carpets are laid out in stripes like architecture. Mostly you just put a great big rug in the room and you're done. They might put a big stripe down the middle, two skinny ones on the edge. It was all architecture, all design, everything's speaking to each other. Here's the same pattern again. The Reed House had a number of hallways, antechambers, sort of social gathering places, probably Marston, just to kind of get you through the house. And here, I think in one of the fever pitch moments of beauty of the beautiful chintz against this graphic, beautiful steel and ebony Chinese floor in an all white room.
Curves you can do.
Yes. Let's close up that pattern again. Here's an extraordinary thing. There's a funny picture that comes after. This is a flower arranging room. So you're thinking that you're seeing all this sophisticated French and modern furniture in 18th century, and some of the more sort of higher thinking of design. These are two Victorian balloon-back chairs. These would have been their grandmother's chairs, the kind that you would hardly even find. They'd be in the trash. Somehow the charm of what these felt right for what is a flower arranging room, to take these old Victorian blue-back chairs with tufted that have a kind of whimsy, like they feel girly, right? They're tufted. I don't know if the color was pale blue or yellow. I'm not sure, but this is a period that another photograph that was taken by Mr. Medina. So this is later. And I don't know if they have the original fabric on at the time, but you can see the contrast. And again, the floor, which has got stars, that's all zenithal. That's all this black man-made material that was his favorite, used over and over and over again. And it's not as if you were using linoleum. It was as if somehow linoleum married marble. And you came up with this material that he could not get enough.
We thought it was striking that the door outside, the plush plank door, which is very Philadelphia. It was very fancy.
Yes. So there's a kind of a combination here, being modern and deco in Philadelphia all at once. Here's a picture of the room from one of the stereoptics that was taken. And I don't know the story, but maybe, I don't know if Stephen, if you do, there were fish tanks in the window. I don't know in Chicago how long they lasted, or if they lasted, or if they look like fish tanks and maybe they were terrariums, which almost make more sense. But there are fish in the photographs. I think later they were removed from what I've seen. But the theater, the magic of that, no stone unturned. We're going to give you a flower arranging room. It's going to be beautiful and elegant, have these great balloon back chairs, this pretty floor and wonderful surfaces. And then we're going to put fish tanks in the windows or terrariums. But the fun of that. And then these sort of shell uplights on either side of the door. So if you're in there arranging flowers, as you can see, the door goes outside. That's where Stevens across the way, and where the garden is. You walk all the way across the way to that beautiful garden for flower cutting to bring it back here to arrange. The famous silver bedroom. I know that many of you have seen this, many to talk about it. It's again a thing that has no equal. Maybe sometimes I think the equals to some of these things, which might sound too lofty, are some great palaces, places like Versailles, things where something was realized all at once it took it to a great degree where the furniture, the carpets, the rugs, everything was all woven and the architecture all of one piece to create something that would knock your socks off. And this room is one of those rooms. It's covered in silver wallpaper. There are no cornices. It's all sweep of the beds are ivory with silver detailing. It's all of a piece of a kind of a vision of half traditional and half modern. Here's a detail of what's going on around the mantle. This is an incised, the slip is the thing that goes around the center of the mantle. Sometimes they're stone, the English often do them in steel or brass. Adler invented a way to do it in this kind of chain pattern, extraordinarily incised into it. It became a signature, used it in more than one house. Here you can see the extraordinary sweep of the plaster sweep up to the ceiling and a bit of that ivory, famous ivory bed. The bathroom. This is a thing that we all have extraordinary bathrooms now, and the bathroom really came about right around here. Crane from Chicago they were really touting what would be the American bathroom. They were behind the energy, the marketing of it. How luxurious can your bath? What should your bathroom be? It doesn't have to be little. Adler jumped onto that bandwagon. Crane was one of his clients, as you know, in Ipswich, and he took it where nobody else did. There were other bathrooms of the period where they started creating architectural baths. That's where, you know, the toilet is in a water closet behind a door. There's another, everything's symmetrical as if you're in a dining room, but it's a bathroom. Things are all balanced and it's around a room that might be 15 by 15, but it's a bathroom. He did this again, like nobody else, the quality of the mirror and the detailing. As you can see up above is a kind of swags and ropes. That's a glomise, that means reverse painting on glass. Here's a detail of it. And this is to show you that all architects of that time, all coming out of the École des Beaux-Arts, all offices of all qualities, they knew how to draw. They could paint, draw flowers, dogs, trees, swags, ribbons, bows. These are things that were all in their mind. These are their typical languages, but to know how to apply those in a modern way, this glass bathroom, did it feel too austere? Did it need something else? Or did he just think, that's what I'm going to do? I'm going to have them reverse painted on the mirror, these beautiful, warm gold swags that will age with the glass. And just to go back in case you didn't see that, that's what's coming all around the top. The next house is across the street, the Ogden Armour House, where the Casatis currently live. And a little bit of that house and why maybe I'm here if I'm rambling, if I sound like I know anything. I grew up here. The young son there was my very best friend. He was a good friend of mine. And I like maybe everyone who had a best pal, I stayed there every night, every weekend. We came home from school there. I loved it. He was my friend. And we were both growing up there. We both wanted to be architects. And we were sitting in this great David Adler house and just started to look around and thought, what are we seeing? This is so cool. And that's where I got my education. And then when I went to the Art Institute, I soon realized that every one of these drawings was in our great Art Institute. At the time, it was all on, it was a kind of microfilm thing you would print in the 70s. I printed every single page I could possibly print, hundreds of them. I still have stacks of them starting to print, I guess around, what is that, like 19 years old and through those years at the Art Institute. So here's a picture of Mrs. Armour. If I get to my notes, all right. As you all know, the Armour House, the Academy, that was the first house, an extraordinary, truly a kind of, quote unquote, robber, a baron estate that Mr. Armour died in, let's see where he died in 1927. At the time, by the way, his finances were they were evaporating. He was losing millions and millions and millions of dollars. So even though they had the great academy, the money was disappearing fast. He dies. And so essentially, whatever penniless means, maybe not truly penniless, but not much left. She did have stock though, vast amounts of stock in an oil company whose name is not on the tip of my tongue, but she had a great deal of stock in it. And within a few years, from having lose an extraordinary Armour fortune, hers came back in tenfold. So every time she builds a house across the street, it might about $3 million today would be about $40 million. So suddenly she's in the money again, and she's not very young. So when she's moving into this house, she's 65 years old and single. He's gone. She's lived and is away. If you can imagine what you all know about the Academy when it was at its prime, in a beyond almost like a sort of palace way. So this is a cottage to her, really. What we could call today, people call a mansion. And she mentioned that. And if you think about it being painted blue and white, just for her, another, and again, another just Adler with just a woman, just a wife. A female, the whole, what would she like? What would make it pretty just for her? She'd lived in that sort of baronial thing, right? Limestone hallways, spooky Italianate, acres and acres and acres. It's different aesthetic, beautifully done, by the way, by Elsie DeWolf, but a different kind of aesthetic. Now, she's an older woman. She's seeing the modernism going around her, and said yes, to a blue and white house.
She's sitting in the,
And that's her sitting in her sunroom. I wish, by the way, this is one of the Holy Grail houses, which there are two of. There are many, many pictures of Adler's work and Elkin's work all over. Extraordinary archives in the Art Institute and extraordinary sister archives in California, beyond extraordinary. They both saved everything, all the fabrics, details, notes, letters back and forth to Jean-Michel Frank. I mean, it's an extraordinary family of archives. This house, for some reason, in case anyone has a connection to it, there are no surviving interior pictures at all. And no one knows why. Everyone's tried. There's even the grandson, Mr. Mitchell in California, who's still alive. There's a great grandson. He has one or two pictures. There seems to be nothing. This in the Cottage house across from our West Park, other house, we can understand why, considering how prolific the Cottage were. There are no documented photographs at all anywhere of the inside of that house. So here she is sitting in the sunroom. This is a photograph given to Scott Powell by Mr. Mitchell. Here she's probably in her 65 or older, maybe 70. And the frame of her house, which is a copy, I will show you where it comes from. Extraordinary, beautiful house. I know you all see it every day coming to the club. This is a beautiful, beautiful watercolor of it. I know you may have seen some of the drawings we have in the library of the landscape group that was here in the 30s. This is probably done by one of those students of Lake Forest Landscape School. They just went around and painted whatever was in town. That was their job, go out and draw a house, and they drew this one. And this is in the collection of a friend of our colleague, Scott Powell. There's the house, always painted that blue. What's interesting, I was mentioning a lot about the Reed house and that extraordinary tree, kind of surrealist landscape in the front and austerity. But what was in some ways more common then was actually lots of planting. And if you look at all great American houses of the 20s and 30s all over the country, you'll find that they were planted, not how we would do it all today, in a much more naturalistic way. Yews that were overgrown, a kind of weedy way. I haven't read a lot about it. It kind of comes out of the Olmsted tradition, but they would apply it to neoclassical houses. And even this house with this sort of overgrown courtyard is a leftover remnants of how this house was originally planted. Very woolly, very natural, not austere, not the way we would think today. This is a picture from Mr. Mitchell, the grandson. It was recently given, maybe not too long ago, to the Art Institute. It was a book of photographs of the house under construction. And here you can see where the trees are coming right up close, even here, right up close to the forecourt. There's the forecourt. Even I think if you look at the shrubbery or bushes to the right back there, of course, there's an air conditioner hiding there today. There'd be a reason to hide it. There's no history of an 18th century house, where this is copied after an English 18th century house, to keep a forecourt this woolly. It's kind of coming out of the American tradition of foundation plantings. All Victorian houses that were high up with porches, everybody started doing foundation plantings, and that sort of stuck, I think. And even in a house like this, it's so dignified and elegant. Still, it's sort of the forecourt is filled with many plantings. I don't know if you can tell, but these are Venetian blinds on the outside of the houses. It was, I don't know how common it was, but Adler had it on many of his houses. Now, it could have been, just like any architect or decorator comes with the favorite thing they like, and they want everyone to have it. It was also on the Ely house. And it went on, and they didn't last long because you had to replace all the tapes that would be rotting in the sun. So the arms went up, the Venetian blind came down in a swag, and you could tip it from inside. And it was a Venetian blind on the outside of your house as an awning. And then it would tuck up inside that valance. This, the house, as you look, this is Montpesson House, which is one of the most widely respected houses of its type in the UK. It's in many, many books. Adler would have seen it in books at the time. There would have been drawings of it. And this is the beginning of this house. So we have the Field House being Virginia, the Reed House being Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and this is Armour's house being in the UK, Salisbury. Here are the famous garden houses. I'm showing you this, which I hope you can understand. This is inside looking out. So if you're in the house, I guess where we are now, looking back out, there's two of them. One of them is a little garden house, the one on the left. The other one over here on the right, where the driveway is, was the butler's cottage. And I mentioned earlier, my good friend Greg, who lived there at the time, we were kids. As he got older, he took that as his studio. And it was a great little building, and it's still there. I'm sure it worked out perfect. The outside of this famous garden house appears in all. These are the Ezra Stoller pictures, by the way. These are all the pictures that the Art Institute commissioned at the time to create the book. Ezra Stoller being the best architectural photographer of the time, using 4x5 cameras, the most exquisite black and white photography. And that's one of these garden houses when the Morgensterns lived there. And it's copied from, which is not noted in the Adler book or anywhere else. This is from the Theological College in UK and called Stonyhurst, which is a vast kind of seminary. Was never anything, was never a private house. I always thought it was. It was always a seminary, a theological college. And at one point, these garden houses were built at the college. And whether or not Adler saw that in an old issue of Country Life in the 1930s or traveled there and saw it, that's exactly the inspiration for the garden house across the way. This is the interior of the house, the stairway. This house hasn't been widely photographed, and the Casatis have lived there for a long time. This is one of the old photographs from the original Art Institute book. The staircase, which again, the dichotomy of it is all in rough plaster. So you're moving through this old Georgian house, and you get to the staircase, and it's made of hand-done plaster, as if it was in a rustic country house. Here are the drawings from Adler, laying out all the vines, convincing old Mrs. Armour, who would have been living in a very Belle Epoque, everything fancy kind of way. But why don't we make this rustic kind of hand-done plaster? I think this will be charming. You know, this is your cottage, so to speak. And this is the house, the building it came from. It's called the Royal Fort in Gloucestershire, UK. Adler's is actually rougher than the original. The design is exact. The railing, the staircase, everything about this room, he saw and copied and reinvented it in his way. If you ever are an opportunity to be across the street, the walls have a wonderful sort of mottled quality. You can see where the big plastic chunks are put together. It's almost stitched together like a rug because they had to put up each piece, or maybe he did that on purpose to create this kind of hidden grid behind it all. This is the sunroom there. This is really probably one of Adler's most extraordinary rooms. It's about, I think, possibly about 40 feet long, 15 feet wide. You step down into it. The Armours had a sunroom, a great sunroom at their house at the academy. I remember I went to camp there, and that's where we'd always have lunch. It's a beautiful lattice room in the middle of the house. I think it's still there, right, for events. So she had, I want another sunroom in my house. What can you do for me? So now you can see that's who the client was. You walk in the center of the Casati house through the middle, and then you step down into the sunroom, which is the whole back of the house. His plaster palms again, and hanging from the ceiling are still period Giacometti lights. I mean, some of these things I'm telling you about because on the sort of on the open market, these are quite rare, important things, original aspects of the great works of coming out of the Frank studio by Giacometti. The tables to the right are by Emilio Terry, who was another member of that trio coming out of Paris. These are original Emilio Terry tables ordered from Paris at the time. They're still there in the house. This is the way the house looked in the 1970s. I detailed the plaster palms. And now to the Leicester Armour House in Lake Bluff, Illinois. By the way, if you haven't noticed, many of these houses are all built at the same time, right around the 30s. You're thinking it's a stock market crash. I'm not particularly up on all aspects of business history, but I know depending on where you were with your finances, it was also a very good time because of labor. There seems to be a rush of building things at that time, unrelated, to other things that were going on at the time. Here's a picture of Leicester and Leola Armour.
How old were they?
Let's see. Built in 1931. Leola Stanton Armour. They were divorced in 1949. So they were in this house together 18 years. I want to show you always the picture of the people who built it because you're looking at their faces. They're who created it. They were the client. Who are they? When they were together, when they were happy, they made this house, and to give them credit for what they created. Here's the front of the Leicester Armour House in Lake Bluff. This house is inspired by a house in Maryland. This is the house called Hammond Hardwood House by Buckland. Another one of the great American iconic houses of the 18th century. Adler looked at that house. That's the DNA of this house. He copied many aspects of it. It's a Georgian house of the finest quality, considered one of the premier houses of its time. There's the great photograph from the Adler book. The back of the house at the time in a stereoptic. The front door with little Leola Jr. This is one of the stereoptics. I think she just died not too long ago in New York. That's an adorable picture. The entry, it's a rotunda. Here are his plaster palms again, and he's marrying with 18th century architecture. This interior of this house, immediately in the 18th century, becomes also in Maryland. So he seems to be staying to the States. So this house is inspired by houses of Maryland. Here's the great hallway, which is very, very much a federal and late federal hallway in terms of its detailing, wallpapers, stairway, austere stairway. The other end of the hallway, as it was originally. The urns that are on the walls are backlit. So one of the other great geniuses of Adler and Elkins was how they lit houses. They lit them the way we do today. We're always looking for secret, sexy ways to light things from behind or under. They were doing that early on. Their houses are not just lit with lantern after lantern down the hall, light after light. They're always looking for secret ways to light. All chandeliers are lit from within, not the bulbs. There are shell sconces everywhere. These two urns lit this whole side of the wall because the urns were lit from behind. This is a brief thing, again, to express more about it. There's a ladies' dressing room in this house, a beautiful little small room that has a sort of early American look. And it has one of these little William and Mary knee-hole desks as a vanity. But it's made of steel and glass. She draws a pitch perfect William and Mary knee-hole desk and has it made in mirror and steel to put inside of a tiny dressing room that had all silver trim and perfect early William and Mary moldings and details. Again, the play of something to wake it up, not just to stick something in, but something new and different. This is the floor that he designed to go with that. The rug, the carpet. And here's this famous bathroom that is now, as you all know, in Miles Redd's house. There's a little story behind this. Funny thing happened on the way to the salvage yard. I went to salvage one with my mother around 2000, I think. We were going to go look for a garden door. We're way on the south side of Chicago. We go through this warehouse and they're laying all over the floor, all these little bits of sparkly stuff. And I just recognized it. I said, this is a Leica Armour at the time, a Leica Armour's bath. And I went nuts. I didn't know we were gutting houses anyway. I know we've all had trouble with houses being torn apart. And I was living in New York at the time. I just couldn't believe an Armour house would be, an Adler house would be gutted. And it was. Richard Marks, the next owner, had taken all these things out. And I just went, I had this idea. So I started calling everybody I knew at the Art Institute, as many people as I could think of, to see if they would fund it. And I thought we could buy it and install it at the Art Institute as a period room. It'd be an honor, an homage to Armour family, homage to the bathroom of the 20th century, an homage to our favorite architect, David Adler. And I couldn't get enough people together. Maybe I was too young, didn't know how to raise money or gather forces. And eventually my friend Miles Ray kept saying, but I want it, but I want it. I would like that bathroom. I said, just hold on, just hold on. And eventually, I gave up, and it was actually sold to a restaurateur. I was going to chop it up, and Miles called, and the bathroom was sold.
Make it into a bar.
Yeah, want to make it into a bar, and Miles was crestfallen. So I called back the old people and I said, "Trust me, this young guy really wants this bathroom." And the rest of the story is media history. Here are the beautiful drawings by Adler. Mrs. Armour's initials are incised to the top. And by the way, this house, remember, they had a federal hallway from Homewood. This is a Greek revival bathroom. So he's saying, I'm going to make you a mirrored bathroom. This is what I like. And maybe you saw, other ones I've done. This one should be Greek revival. That's what's fitting in your house. It's Greek revival in glass. The floor, extraordinary terrazzo floor with tiny oak leaves. Would you say yes to that? Or would you say, could the floor be plainer? when Miles did it, I mean, the floor had to be ripped up because it didn't come with the bathroom because it was terrazzo, but he has just giant slabs of a stone. But this is a tiny, delicate pattern. And maybe he felt this was the way to warm this bathroom, this little tiny pattern of oak leaves, a kind of combination of almost like a hooked rug with oak leaves and a little bit of an Art Deco mixed together, which makes sense. There's the room today. Now it has 4 giant pieces that were hoisted up through the window of enormous pieces of black granite. It still has a metal inlay, and it's found a new life in New York City in a little townhouse. Can you handle any more? Am I going on long? You got more? Okay. The Wheeler House in Lake Forest, another one of really the great moment where architecture, modernism, decorating, and client all come together like the Reed House. Here are Mr. and Mrs. Wheeler. Mr. Wheeler died very soon, right after the house was built, just a few years after, 2 or 3 years after. So I think he created the house with the Wheelers, but she lived in it until she was remarried. But it seems like there's always a woman on her own. The front of the Wheeler House. Now, if you were the client and this was your architect's elevation, and he showed you this sort of lopsided elevation, nothing is symmetrical. The whole story is hidden behind the walls. All you look at is the center little block of the house. That's all you're supposed to pay attention to. You come into the courtyard and that's all you're supposed to see. It's another trust me moment. Because the 2 walls are there and then the trees have to be planted. If you don't plant the trees, it doesn't work. So you have to buy into the house being completely lopsided. You have to buy into the walls and you don't buy into the bleached trees behind the walls. The whole vision of it. This is what will work for you, just the center block. And this is when it was painted white. Many of the houses, by the way, the ones that are on the beige brick, the Ely house in the beige brick, the Casati house is now soft, Laura's house that she painted, they were all meant to be whitewashed. It's an inexpensive Chicago pinky brick. He loved that idea of it looking pickled, that pinky beige coming through the white. In the East, it's a lot of red brick. This used to be whitewashed. It was red, with white with red coming through. Here, Adler loved the idea of the soft pinky beige coming through the white. So the Wheeler House was originally white.
Mayflower.
The front door, the crazy house.
Shelley Ashford.
Oh, the Wheeler House on Mayflower, right at the corner of Illinois and Mayflower. This is important because I think this door, this fantastic door at the front of the window, is a house that's all over the internet, all over Pinterest, anywhere you can imagine. Everybody loves this door. This door comes from a tiny little book called The Smaller. We have it in our office. We have this book in our office. I can't remember the title of it, but this is a book. This is a little door that sat on a little country road and a little tiny village. And Adler must have had that same book, whether or not he went to England and went to that little village on that little road and saw this door and took his Brownie camera and took a picture of it, or did he have that book? Probably likely he had that book, and there weren't that many books at the time. And he saw that door and said, this is the front of the Wheeler House. I'm going to make it bigger, sexier, put double doors in it. And the rest, again, is design history of this extraordinary front door at Wheeler's.
Went up the curtain.
Oh, back in the day, when you didn't have air conditioning or screen doors, curtains were part of how you kept the dirt out of your house. So that's a striped curtain on probably what was called what's the term they use in the UK for the road, the main road through the village? I can't think of what I was saying. The high road, exactly. Here's the sunken garden, part of that irregular shape on the back of the house. Another view of the sunken garden. I'm going to go faster now because this is the back of the house. The back of the house is from Germantown, Pennsylvania. This is one of the most famous early favorite designs of a American colonial house in all the books and drawn many, many times. The Wick House. It's the lattice that he copied right down to the detail of like plaid lattice and the double door in the center. That strange double door. It's actually bringing 2 houses together. The purpose of that door is they enlarge the house. And that's the hallway. That's the breezeway. Probably in the maybe in the 1830s or 50s, this old Pennsylvania German house was added onto, and they had to put in that door as a breezeway. So at the back of the Wheeler House is the very same door, the same double doors, the same transom, the same trellis. So he's mixing the back of a Pennsylvania German house with this high style Chinese chinoiserie, Rococo, American country house. the library that you've all seen many, many times. You think it's this extraordinary, beautiful traditional library. It's unlike any other library because it is the beautiful traditional library, but it's all veneer. Until this time when people begun to make veneer, wood veneer, you couldn't do things like this. So like this white plaster, it's veneer. It's a sweep of modern background as if it was wallpaper. And then the period moldings are all stuck on it. Again, he's creating that same tension. That's what excites him. Another view of the library, the period time and the stereoptics, the bare parquet, French parquet de Versailles rough floors in a English library with modern veneer walls. Here's the mantle, which is a very famous mantle, which was owned by Adler. He gave many pieces of architectural details to the Art Institute as part of his gifts to the Art Institute. And that's where the mantle came from, an old piece he bought that he had copied. The interior of this house comes from this house. It's called Clayton House in Buckinghamshire, UK, with an extraordinary interior of a mad craze of Rococo Chinese interior, the kind of thing that would have done in the 18th century. Whether or not he saw it when the family was living here, I don't know. He couldn't have seen anything else because it's clearly the inspiration for everything about the inside of the Wheeler's house. This is the inside of Clayton House. This is the famous Chinese room. Can you see those little tiny white stripes along the details of the side of the chimney breast? When I'll show you when you get to the Wheeler living room, the room had nothing in it but that. All the trim, all the details of these tiny little white carved plastered details that run up and down the edges of the room. And the rest of it is all Rococo and Chinese plasterwork against plain background. And blue and yellow and white was the theme of the entire interior of the house. This is the octagonal hallway with more plaster palms. And this is the living room. So I don't know if you can see from the vantage point of where you are, but there's no cornice. If you can just see little bits of details, that's that exact same detail from Clayton House. There's nothing else in it. And that extraordinary palmettes that run in that curved bay window designed by Adler are also the idea of what you see here is the Rococo and the walls disappear. The floor is a Chinese pattern designed by Adler to go with the parquet. It's bare, but the plaster and the Rococo pops forward. The background recedes, the brackets pop forward, the little detail of the molding. The mirror on the end wall was embedded into the wall. It's a completely modern room. The rug is designed by the architect to go with the room, to be on the same diagonal as the floor, all in blue and white and yellow. There's the rug in the archives of the Art Institute. The famous loop chair by Francis Elkins. Do we have time? A little bit of story on this. We'd always see this chair in our famous Lake Forest Library. It was a very, very famous chair from the mid 18th century, which eventually became into the ownership of the Ronald Tree, part of the Marshallfield family, and was widely photographed. There was only a few of them. Elkins must have seen them. They were in all the great books of the time. This old spooky black chair that was modern from the 18th century, and she had them copied. And she said, "That's a great chair." And anyway, the rest is history. Well, if you're looking for these chairs out there and you hope to find a good one or reproduction, always look for the saddle seat. That's what gives it its music. So it's all those loops and that sort of slightly sagged saddle seat. Here's that floor again. Here's an Italian floor in a house with a German back elevation in zenithorm, this modern material, and this is a kind of Italian modern dining room with an deco energy. And across the hall is a Rococo Chinese room from a house in the UK. With the pattern of that floor, which is still there today. This zenithorm has survived by great care. Mrs. Wheeler's bedroom, part of a stereoptic. Again, think you're the client. There's no cornice, there's no moldings. You told them you're just going to drape the room. There's nothing else. It's that same famous pattern that you saw before, the one that we turned into wallpaper. The entire room is draped all the way around. And it's a pretty mad, delicious thing. Whether or not it was probably also in that green and white, I'm not sure. Very inventive with just the octagonal doors popping through in the windows. Modern fabrics. The chair in front is by Siri Malm, Adler. Francis, his sister, and Siri mom were all good friends, trading secrets, helping each other, buying from each other, just like Frank in Paris. There's the chair, which can be bought today at Liz O'Brien in New York. Not the chair, but a copy of it. Here's the son's bedroom, and I don't know if this was Henry or Leslie, but for a boy's bedroom, it's an amazing thing. Again, it's made of veneer. It's a modern room for a young boy with a beautiful creation of decoration against that very austere modern background. It looks like it's simple, but it's really quite difficult. The combination of mahogany, leather, the curious bed, and these veneered walls, creating something quite dynamic. That's the last. You've been very patient. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, James and Dick. Boy, what a passionate presentation.
Thank you.
Packed with a wealth of knowledge. They might have time for a couple of questions if anyone has a question.
Have one.
Oh,
I didn't realize how much Adler copies other homes. In your opinion, where does inspiration end and imitation begin?
I don't know. I think.
Draw the line in imitation and inspiration.
Yeah, I think the inspiration is that he copied bits and pieces, and he had his own idea. I mean, I think even if you're a painter and you're doing a paint, there's something you're seeing, like you're painting in 2020, but you love Gauguin, and someone might say, you know, you're using Gauguin's brushstrokes, or I see the forms there, but it's your own. I think his were no different. I think he was that. I think it was that high, you know, truly creative, and he knew how to do it, as if you threw them all in front of him and he juggled them all together, and he knew exactly what to do, and they came out smooth and seamless. You know, they weren't clumsy. They hit the right mark.
Amy?
As for looking at a lot of these, the detail of the star on the floor and some of the other architecture details remind me of Lake Forest baseball.
Oh,
Some of the, you back and forth, like.
well, stars, you know, it's funny that we were talking earlier, and even talking to Shelley about clients, and we had a conversation once with our good friend Miles about this. Stars were everywhere. People were, there's a bit more comfort with the language of decorative design, whatever that may be, just decoration, the language of decoration. In the Reed bathroom, there were 5 stars. We would always say, could it be plainer? Could it do something more tailored? You know, is there something, even we've done clients where we said, how about curved bay windows? They said, could we have straight bay windows? And, you know, something about the era, maybe coming at a time where there's so much decoration around you, they weren't familiar with it. And a star is a great thing. People love stars. I mean, we say we love them, but then no one says, do I want it on my floor and it's permanently installed, that star, you know? I don't know why the connection to the high school, but a star was a really popular motif, you know? Well, the architect who did the high school, I believe he worked for, did Stanley Anderson work in the Adler? He worked there. So he was educated in that environment, which must have been an extraordinary place to be educated. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and there were many other contemporaries. You know, there's a handful of architects in Philadelphia. There's a handful in Boston. There's a handful outside of Chicago, New York, Palm Beach. There are gaggles of these guys, you know, and gals everywhere. They were catering to the same crowd with the same energy, the same amount of money. But nobody hit it out of the park like this. Which is, yeah, it's right. Hence, right. Why is everybody still so interested? Why is there a airing today on PBS? I think this evening a documentary. Why? You know, my
Favorite Adler building?
gosh, I don't know. I mean, in some ways, you know,
Big one.
yeah. I mean, in some ways, the Christie Coterie, because it's so perfect, and then, you know, many other things that are equally as fine. There's so many great pieces to every one of them. They're extraordinary. His own house in Libertyville that you can go visit has a little a laboratory of his own ideas in a tiny scale. is an amazing example of things. Many houses I didn't talk about at all today that we all know well here in town.
You have one?
I don't, sorry.
I did one.
Yeah.
I looked at Ely House in Lake Bluff, the French one.
Where is it?
It's on Moffett, just right over the border in Lake Bluff. Actually, the people here bought one of the gatehouses that were sitting at our table.
Oh.
Not, okay.
Other go ahead.
Yeah,
The Davidson.
yeah, that's my favorite house. Because it's one room deep.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes, Steve. Yes. I don't know. That's a great question. And I spoke about that, in retrospect, only because of what I'm sort of seeing in front of me. And it's giving wondering, the Tobin Clark house in California was built solely for her. I don't know. There are in the great first Adler book with all the some of the correspondences back and forth. There are more letters from the husbands about to and forth about the timing and things that are going on. Certainly Mr. Hamill. Absolutely, there would be an example of the opposite. Mr. Hamill, 100% involved in his house, every detail, passionate, creating arm in arm with Adler. They were good friends, finishing each other's sentences, lots of good ideas. And I'm sure there were others too. And I think maybe it was just a product of the time of men dying early,
Well, thank you both. Great job.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Where's helpful? Okay. I know, well. That's right, next time. We're passing drinks soon, we're gonna be here. With Darling Melissa. I know, it's really extravagant. Oh, I gotta hear that. Oh, you have to have this book. Oh my God, look at all the amazing photos. Yeah. Richard, in fact, really take a look. Wow. Yeah. Sure you can. I think get everything on me. I gotta get one of those couple of his pictures. It's David and Julie and Jane, like your head just exploded with idea. I mean, like, yeah. Scratch and yeah, doing that. Yeah. You're in such a great fun. Work. I want to yeah. Yeah. No, you are in. Thank you so much. It's a boring. Yeah. But it is well, it's kind of getting nervous.